I wish, first of all, to thank all of you for accepting our invitation to this seminar on EU-US cooperation on the artificial intelligence governance and the role of the Trade and Technology Council. Let me stress that the meeting is jointly organized by IAI and Intesa Sanpaolo in the framework of our partnership with Intesa Sanpaolo, and I wish to thank Intesa for its very precious and valuable support and cooperation. As the title of the seminar indicates, the objectives of the seminar is twofold. First, we want to look into the state of play of EU-US cooperation on AI regulation, so the opportunities, but also, of course, the obstacles to forging a transatlantic consensus for convergent approaches and policies in this field, which is, as we all know, of paramount importance not only for global economy and national economies, but also the everyday life of ordinary people, by discussing in particular the latest developments in the EU and US policy making and their results. The second objective is to discuss the specific role of the Trade and Technology Council, TTC, which was established in 2021 by the European Commission and the Biden administration as a consultation, a negotiation platform to promote a common transatlantic industrial and technological leadership and address crucial bilateral trade matters, including in particular sanction and export control. And we know that those issues, particularly sanctions and export control, have, of course, gained a growing prominence following particularly Russia's aggression against Ukraine and the deepening technological rivalries with China and other actors. There is, of course, an intimate link between technological advances, the strategies to protect and regulate technologies, and trade and investment policies. This transatlantic endeavor, the TTC, was launched thanks to the European Commission leadership, but also, not less important, to the strong transatlantic orientation of the current US administration. However, as we know, the Biden administration has confirmed several protectionist measures adopted by the Trump administration and also launched several other policies, particularly industrial policies, that have caused considerable tensions across the Atlantic. To some extent, the transatlantic convergence for this reason on trade and technology policies has become, in this sense, more difficult. At the same time, the two reasons I mentioned before, Russia's aggression and China's growing challenge, have been pushing the transatlantic partners towards a more active and systematic search for greater convergence and closer cooperation on trade and technology. What we want to discuss today is how much convergence or divergence there has been so far between the decision-making processes of US and EU on AI regulation, and compare and contrast what has been done so far in Brussels and Washington. This implies making a comparison between US and EU parameters for risk assessment, what type of responsibilities and obligations have been introduced for developers and users, and the governance and enforcement instruments frameworks that have been introduced, and how all these could evolve in the future. We know at the same time that AI regulation would also, of course, at least in principle, require an effective governance at the global level. This is indeed a central subject of the global agenda of the UN, but also of other bodies and forums such as the OECD, the G20, and the G7, and will be certainly one of the top priorities of Italy's G7 presidency next year. The key question is, in this regard, is if a potential transatlantic consensus could be extended to a wider group of countries, if not at the global level. In the shorter term, perhaps it will be particularly important to promote a greater synergy between the many and indeed various and diverse AI governance initiatives. All these issues are quite complex, deeply interconnected, and moving very fast. But today we have the great pleasure and privilege to have with us Andrea Renda, who will brief us on the latest development and also give his views on what lays ahead. Andrea is the Director of Research at the Center for European Policy Studies, CEPS, one of the leading think tanks in Brussels working on EU policies. He has worked for many years, if not decades, on regulation policies, particularly those regarding technological developments. He also currently the director of the Trade and Technology Dialogue, which is a EU-sponsored project aimed essentially, in a nutshell, at providing the Trade and Technology Council, TTC, with evidence and research-based advice and suggestions. The project includes 10 different working groups that correspond to those essentially of the TTC. So there is a parallel effort of the on the part of the TTD in support of the work being done in the context of the TTC. Our institute is one of the 3 think tanks belonging to the consortium of the TTD, the other being, of course, CEPS and the European University Institute. This consortium, composed of 3 think tanks, is in charge of coordinating the work of the task forces in close coordination, in any case, with both the European Commission, but also the US administration. So many thanks, Andrea, for being with us, for having again accepted our invitation. And I wish to say that our joint work in framework of the TTD has been for us very inspiring and also rewarding. After Andrea's kickoff presentation, we will have 2 interventions. The first by Andrea Gumina, Senior Policy Advisor to the Italian Committee on Foreign Direct Investment at the Ministry of Enterprises and Made in Italy, and Dora Meredith, Director of ODI Europe in Brussels. I also wish to express our deepest thanks to them for accepting our invitation. Now, without further ado, please, Andrea, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ettore. Needless to say, it's a great pleasure to be here. As Ettore knows, because at the time he was the director of the Istituto Affari Internazionali, I've been involved with the institute for a few years, in which I was actually actively contributing to the organization of the seminars on the international economy and to the production of a yearly report that was at the time, I don't know if it still exists, called and titled The Global Outlook, right? We were organizing seminars and then compiling everything into a single report during, I think, roughly a decade ago until 2015. Then I went to the US to spend 2 academic years at Duke. And so I had to leave this engagement with the Istituto that I really appreciated a lot. Even earlier, as my acquaintance with Andrea Gumina from the years in which we were 2 young researchers at Lewis University here in Rome, and also Riccardo. In the years I was here in the Istituto Affari Internazionali, Riccardo, I think one of those years had spent a fellowship at Brookings, right? And then this led him to specialize in transatlantic affairs even more than he already was before going there. So all this was happening roughly between 10 and 7, 8 years ago, I think, up to between 2012 and 2015, something like this. And it's also a pleasure to be involved with the Istituto Affari Internazionali in this project, the Trade and Technology Dialogue. It is a project that sees us really in the trenches of something that changes skin on a daily basis, right? The transatlantic relation. It has ups and downs, but it's still a very solid relation in terms of ongoing initiatives. The Trade and Technology Council was launched in Pittsburgh in 2021. It was shaped around 10 working groups, some of which are more active than the others. In particular, today we will talk about working group number 1, which has been quite active over the years in not only launching initiatives related to artificial intelligence. We'll see the roadmap on AI, but also more generally cooperation and technological standardization. And even recently, on the 17th of November, there was a meeting of this working group in which there was a renewed commitment to cooperating on standards, in particular in AI, but also on other, for example, clean technologies. And in the future, perhaps quantum, although this is subject to a separate task force in the TTC. The evolution of the TTC is also quite interesting because the TTC came in quite handy after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, because the two sides of the Atlantic could coordinate their activities in particular in export controls. And so the idea of having a platform that can be activated also for non-foreseen uses became apparent during those early days of the TTC and in the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. At the other end of the spectrum, if you wish, the TTC was also useful to help the EU voice in an elegant way its concern for the adoption of the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, which, as Ettore was sort of implicitly hinting at, was rather badly received, let's say, by EU institutions of being relatively protectionistic, and gave rise to the creation of a task force in which the EU is gradually securing a rather more favorable treatment compared to other countries in the world, and not as favorable as the ones that are part of NAFTA, but at least that some of the limitations and the restrictions in the Inflation Reduction Act will be lifted for some products for EU companies. So this is ongoing work. Today we talk about one important avenue that also has had ups and downs. I'm going to quickly summarize what is going on artificial intelligence. Happy to take questions because as you will see at the end of this presentation, what is happening at the moment on AI is really a proliferation of initiatives around the world, rather uncoordinated at the moment, with different scope, with different directions, with different levels of ambition and different degrees of participation. So just to show really visually where the EU and the US are with AI regulation, you have this first slide, which of course doesn't have concrete dates for the reasons that I will explain in the coming minutes. The dates that we are sure about is that is the 20th of April 2021, after 3 years of work in particular, a little bit longer than that, but in particular three years of active work on the preparation of this proposal. The European Commission comes out with the first ever global, at the global level, the first ever attempt to regulate artificial intelligence in a rather comprehensive way, risk-based, but relatively comprehensive. This is the proposed Artificial Intelligence Act. I'll say something more about the structure of this because it's quite interesting and important to understand where AI regulation or non-regulation is going at the moment. I have been quite active in the shaping of that proposal. I was a member of the high-level expert group on AI of the European Commission, an independent group that was active between 2018 and 2020. And then I led the impact assessment study of this piece of legislation for the European Commission. So it saw the light there. And since then, we are into the so-called, after the amendments of the Parliament and the position, the compromise of the Council, we are in the so-called trilogue situation. That is, in principle, that was supposed to be finalized already earlier this year. So we're still in the gray, let's say, bar on the upper left hand of this slide. The legislative procedure should be completed in principle on the 6th of December this year under the Spanish presidency, but there are a number of pending issues that make it very difficult to imagine a successful conclusion of this negotiation. I can say something more if there are questions, of course, but I will say something in this presentation. But one of the key outstanding items in the negotiation between, in particular, the European Parliament and the Council, and even more than the Council, 3 specific member states, France, Germany, and Italy. So that the element of divergence is on whether the AI Act should include regulatory measures for so-called foundation models and general purpose AI systems, which basically go back to large language models and the chat GPTs, meaning the disruption of the public debate and the alarmism that we've seen in the past year after the entry in the market of very powerful frontier AI models such as ChatGPT and similar. Once this will be finalized, though, there will be another couple of years before the AI Act sees the light. So at the moment, we are probably thinking that the AI Act at the EU level, expecting it to enter into force in late 2025 or even early 2026. Meanwhile, there will be a standardization process that is already started. The European Commission has issued a mandate for standardization. Interestingly, the mandate was given to CENELEC and not the digital standardization body of the EU, ETSI, for reasons that, if you want, I can explain later. I don't want to go into too much detail. Now, in principle, the United States started much slower than the EU, with the Obama administration already in October 2016, with the Office of Science and Technology Policy releasing through the White House a National AI Research and Development Strategic Plan. This would then extended and in many respects confirmed under the Trump administration, but there were no real attempts to regulate AI or to propose a policy for AI until October 2022, I would say, when the Office of Science and Technology Policy releases still this communication, if you wish, if you use an EU jargon, which is titled Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. And the whole thing, the whole debate in the US continues mostly around so-called voluntary standardization measures. The NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technologies in the Department of Commerce of the United States, releases a voluntary risk management framework for AI in January 2023. But again, this is voluntary, although, for example, Ricardo would know because he's been dealing also with cybersecurity, among other things. There's a if you take the example of the NIST framework for cybersecurity, it's voluntary, but it's in terms of moral suasion and in terms of uptake, it's quite powerful. And this is the same attempt in the Department of Commerce with AI, that this risk management framework would sort of frame and guide the way in which artificial intelligence is developed and deployed in the United States. In May, the Biden administration sort of warms up again in the aftermath of the alarmism launched because of the very powerful nature of large language models. There is a publication on national priorities for AI. Later, there will be a guidance document by the Office of Management and Budget. You don't see this in this slide, which basically dictates priorities in public procurement for the US and also in use of AI by the public administration. But most importantly, and we will see this shortly, in October 2023, the United States, the Biden administration takes the initiative of adopting a very comprehensive, very ambitious executive order, which mandates basically all the relevant federal agencies in the United States to adopt either regulatory measures or guidance. And so the US, starting after the EU on AI, but take and shape their AI policy before the EU has actually finalized the AI Act. So it's difficult to imagine that this has been done in tandem or in constant communication. And so I'll give a few details about this. And indeed, the United States has been gradually more and more assertive in its approach to the regulation of artificial intelligence, not necessarily always in deep collaboration with the European Union. One of the reasons for this is that, just to add a little bit of spice to the conversation, when ChatGPT was again entered the market and the likes of Google Bard or Meta Llama and many other powerful AI models entered the market, since these models are generative AI models and they generate, among other things, text, they are large language models that can give answers to prompts by end users. China was immediately urged to take action to regulate these systems. And the US observed what's going on in China. The Chinese regulation on page 1 and understandably states that generative AI systems have to be aligned with socialist values. And in the United States, there is a rush to give guardrails to the systems, but at the same time control their development and push their development around the world. The EU is still stuck into whether or not to regulate these systems, because in the original proposal, what you see on the top left side of this slide, in the AI Act, this is pre-ChatGPT, pre-large language models. And so the potential regulation of foundation models, as we call them today, was not contemplated because this was not a problem at the time. So the issue is whether these rules should be introduced now, post hoc or not. So very quickly, the EU published its AI Act. I'm not going to go into each and every aspect of this presentation, but if there are this slide, but if there are questions, I'm happy to go back to it. The AI Act basically took a risk-based approach. It identified some applications of AI that are unacceptably risky and thereby should be prohibited. Originally, these were mostly related to mental manipulation and social credit scoring, even if in Europe we see today quite a lot of profiling and social scoring by national governments. And but in the version amended by the parliament, you also have potentially predictive policing and also the use of remote biometric identification in public places. Actually, one of the pending issues in the negotiation of the AI Act is whether there should be exemptions to the prohibition to use real-time biometric identification in public places for security reasons. And the Council being more ambitious in wishing to have exemptions, the European Parliament being very minimalistic there. The core of the regulation is the high-risk AI uses, and these are the pre-selected high-risk applications are the ones that you see there in the bullet points. For those are the applications that would be regulated mostly through either to different means depending on the type of product, but through an ex-ante conformity assessment, which in most cases will be done through self-assessment by the providers of AI systems, and a continuous reassessment of the conformity through market monitoring, especially for those AI systems that display learning capabilities and so can change their behavior over time by interacting with the external environment. There is also a limited risk category, which is basically the type of mostly chatbots that can generate confusion among end users as regards the human or non-human nature of the interlocutor. For this, basically what will happen is what I call the revenge CAPTCHA, meaning the CAPTCHA is this thing that we do on a daily basis on the internet where we declare that we're not robots, right? Here is actually the opposite. It's the robot or the AI system that has to declare whenever there is a possibility of confusion that it is not a human, and then the rest will not be regulated. So that is the main structure of the AI Act. At the moment, we have still pending, and I'll only go very quickly through this, but again, happy to go back to this. The definition is now settled only 2-3 weeks ago and aligned with the OECD definition of AI, the revised definition of AI by the OECD. What actually should go in the red lines, in the prohibited uses and in the high risk, is still an element of contention and controversy between the Parliament and the Council. Whether there should be and this also affects foundation models, provisions for responsibility between those that develop and deploy AI systems and the ones that actually bring them on the market, that very often do not know much about what is inside the AI system. I'm going to give you one example. Imagine Duolingo, right? The app that some of you might have used to learn languages. Duolingo now wants to use GPT to improve its user interface. Duolingo purchases commercial access to the API, the interface of GPT, uses its functionalities, and develops an application. So if that application, at the moment is not the case, but imagine that application is considered to be high risk under the AI Act, Duolingo will be regulated under the AI Act, not OpenAI. So the concern here is Duolingo actually knows nothing about GPT. So how can it undergo conformity assessment unless OpenAI helps Duolingo go through conformity assessment? And so this is what is meant by responsibility throughout the value chain. Should there be regulatory or soft law provisions in the AI Act? Is not clear yet. And then who should be governing this? An AI office, an AI board, should there be private enforcement, and many, many other things are still elements to some extent are pending in the negotiation of the AI Act. Now, while this was ongoing, and also knowing that the US was increasingly interested in the Biden administration in developing a policy framework, perhaps not as regulatory, but at least a policy framework on AI, in the context of the TTC, the Biden administration and the European Commission reached an agreement to develop an AI roadmap. The AI roadmap is formally part of Working Group 1 of the TTC, and it is aimed at cooperation. There is a separate memorandum of understanding between the White House and the Commission on the research and development side, research and development cooperation. But in the roadmap, there's basically the creation of 3 sub-working groups. The first working group, and I'm a member of that one, and this is being backed by the Trade and Technology Dialogue, of course. The attempt is to create a shared terminology on AI. And so what some of you might have seen is that we've been able to publish a first list of 65 terms on which there are joint definitions between the US and the European Union. This has been also open to public consultation. We received a number of comments. As part of the TTD work, we are now processing these comments. And so we will publish a revised list of these first terms, and then we will expand the joint vocabulary on AI between the two sides. This also will have important repercussions on the work at the broader level of the OECD. I see that as I'm chairing at the moment the OECD Working Group on AI Risk and Accountability as part of the OECD network of experts on AI. The second working group is on standardization. So there should be cooperation between NIST and CEN-CENELEC to develop standards. The problem there is, of course, that CEN-CENELEC will develop standards that are related to the conformity assessment procedure under the AI Act. NIST has its own risk management framework. They don't really look alike. So to some extent, they will cooperate on joint terminologies, on joint approaches to standards, on joint ethical requirements in standards, for example, some of the technical requirements as well, but the standards will not be identical. So it is still unclear whether the prophecy of Margrethe Vestager, when this was launched, that Vestager at the moment is not, at least is away, or is on leave from her position of Vice President of the European Commission. But what she said earlier this year was the objective is to make sure that the ones that comply with the AI Act also comply with the EU, with the US policy framework, and vice versa. We're not there yet. We're very far from this at the moment, but happy again to take questions on this. The third working group is on emerging risks from AI. And again, I'm part of that working group in a strange position, basically representing the European Commission there as an expert identified by the European Commission. And there are other 2 experts from the Commission and 3 experts from the Biden administration, Department of Commerce, Department of State, Office of Science and Technology Policy. So within that context, we published, again, the terminology was published originally in corresponding, in the occasion of the 4th ministerial of the TTC in Luleå in northern Sweden. But then there's been a call for comments, and again, the revised version will be published in a couple of weeks. Meanwhile, we went to Luleå as part of the TTD, and something interesting happened, which is, in my opinion, a turning point of this conversation, because the EU policymakers realized that it would take too long. With the acceleration of AI, it would take too long for the EU to wait for the AI Act to be finalized. And this is why I showed you the timeline at the beginning. It would take another couple of years once the text is finalized to get it to enter into force. Then there will be the implementation. So the effects will be seen in a long time. At the same time, there was this alarmism created by the same tech experts and practitioners that have launched these powerful AI systems. They wrote an open letter saying we should stop training these powerful systems. Then they went to the Senate in the US and they said, please regulate us. We are like nuclear weapons. And then they came to Brussels and they said, please don't regulate us like the AI Act. We don't like that. So it was a little bit of an unclear situation, but certainly Vestager and Breton, so the commissioner and the vice president in charge of this dossier, felt like there was a need to do something very urgently. Breton started announcing, indeed, without consulting with other people in the commission, without consulting Vestager, a series of AI pacts, so bilateral agreements with tech giants. Vestager translated this into a proposal to the US that you're going to listen to now, to create a voluntary code of conduct without giving up on the AI Act negotiation, but at the same time accelerating some of the effects of the AI Act, perhaps in combination and coordination with the US.
Continue this conversation. I think we only have time to give first Executive Vice President Vestager and then Secretary Raimondo the chance to close this meeting with some final remarks. Again, short, because I know some of you have to leave very, very soon.
Well, thank you very much. I think this has been truly fascinating, both because of the perspective that has been painted here of what we are into with generative AI, but also with the focus that something needs to be done, and this is now. I find it very encouraging with the different inspirations as to what is needed. So the industry itself, the external view from the outside, and then of course the feedback loops to make sure that this is something that is developing. And we will be very encouraged to take it from here, to produce a draft, to invite global partners to come on board to cover as many as possible. And we will make this a question of absolute urgency to have such an AI code of conduct for a voluntary sign-up. And we will not forget that there are other sorts of artificial intelligence, obviously. There are a number of things that needs to be done, but the thing is that we need to show that democracy is up to speed. Because the legislative procedures, they must take their time. That is the nature of legislation. But this is a way for democracies to answer in real time at a question that is really, really in our face right now. And I've found this very encouraging to do it, and I'm looking very much forward to work with as many as possible, in depth and very fast. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you.
I'll move forward, otherwise it takes too long. But just to give you, first of all, an idea of what we do in the Trade and Technology Council. So we try to facilitate these agreements and in the Trade and Technology dialogue that accompanies it. And at the same time, this was a proposal that was rather short-lived, a two-pager that was given to the US administration. We haven't seen the follow-up to this paper. And when I say that the transatlantic relation sometimes has ups and downs, a week later, the US administration announces unilateral voluntary commitments with the 11 tech corporations. And since then, the US continues to work on its own path while cooperating on these 3 working groups with the EU, but mostly setting its own course. And the global community, really takes and accelerates with a proliferation of initiatives of all sorts. the Bletchley Park Summit, the UK AI Summit, which gives rise to a declaration which is fairly shallow, if you wish, but goes in the direction of a voluntary framework at the moment for responsible development of AI, and in particular for AI safety. The G7 perhaps has a very loose, in very loose connection with the original proposal by the European Commission, takes up the possibility to develop international guiding principles and a code of conduct on artificial intelligence, which is being launched and now operationalized through a number of practices, but still very much self-regulation. The United Nations, in parallel with Secretary General Guterres and the tech envoy Amandeep Gill, decides to create a high-level advisory body on AI, which is multi-stakeholders. There's roughly 30 people that have been just appointed. They will work over the coming weeks. I saw Amandeep Gill last week. It seems that a first report will be ready by the end of the year, or at the latest in January this year. All this is to some extent surrounding the TTC. You see, the TTC is this very small thing that is in between initiatives that at the moment are being prepared in the G7, G20, GPI, OECD. Well, here is even the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement between Singapore, New Zealand, Chile, and Costa Rica. So for the people that study at the EU level differentiated integration, this is a type of graph that sounds familiar, right? When you have variable geometries here. But the thing is, there are a number of players that really have decided to focus on AI safety and mostly on codes of conducts. There are players like the US that go more in the direction of safety. They've created a safety institute for AI just a few weeks ago, but also want to go in the direction of sector-specific regulation in a number of fields. And then there's the EU that keeps longing for a deeper, more comprehensive regulation. My impression is that the TTC at the moment is being marginalized because of the pressure towards broader frameworks to take action. But at the same time, the TTC can achieve deeper results because both the US and even more the EU, I would say, wants to go deeper than simply shallow self-regulatory measures. So a couple of recent papers or editorials in which I have explained a bit more so that I don't need to do this now, otherwise it will become too long. It probably is already too long, my speech. So a few weeks ago, I looked a bit more in depth at what's going on with these different initiatives at the global level. Since I've been in Tokyo recently, I really, what is happening with many players starting from different directions and trying to achieve different results, it looked to me like the Shibuya Scramble Crossing that you see, the one that you see in the picture, which is the biggest crossroads in the world, right? Everybody starts from a different position and perhaps wants to get to a different place. In my opinion, in principle, the most meaningful initiative is the one of the United Nations, because it's the only one that looks at giving access to less developed countries to the benefits of AI, and also rather than focusing on AI as a risk that could even lead to the extinction of the human race, which in my opinion is an intentional hype that to some extent diverts the attention of policymakers towards using AI for the Sustainable Development Goals. So AI is a means rather than a monster or an end. And recently, last Friday, I published another plea to the policymakers at the EU level. The 6th of December, in my opinion, is a very important date for the EU to finalize the text of the AI Act. What I say in this paper, in this very short commentary, is that, in my opinion, this could have been done, ChatGPT or not, it could have been done very easily already in February this year. And as you see, perhaps you know, in this account of what has happened over the past months, you probably realize that the EU over these past months somehow lost the leadership and the lead it had in the regulation of AI. It was a trailblazer, and now it's almost a laggard. Okay, so I'll stop here and give back the floor to Ettore.
Many thanks, Andrea, for this presentation, which has been indeed very enlightening, informative, but also stimulating. So you have been able to cover a very wide range of issues, as some I would say in passing. which means that now I think we have many questions, much curiosity to look into some of those issues even more deeply. But that's also my case. But I now refrain from asking you question now because we have the other speakers, and I have the pleasure now to go to give the floor to Dr. Gumina, please, for the first comments.
Thank you so much, Mr. Grego, for inviting me. And thank you, Andrea, for this outstanding introduction to this topic. I think that last time we worked together was about 20 years ago. Okay, not 10 or 12, but it's okay. It's okay. But, you know, time is moving so fast. And let me start from one of the last consideration you made about AI. First of all, let me say that I completely agree on your very, very large and extensive way of tackling this issue, and also presenting different angles in terms of what could and couldn't be done at EU and US level. And let me also add that I'm a fan of the TTC from the very beginning, and this is why I'm contributed on a personal aspect to give life to one of the bilateral initiatives between Italy and US, what is called the Transatlantic Investment Committee, and actually a foundation to revive the attention on investments. So let me start from investments, okay? And from one of the last consideration that you made, what is AI about when policymakers think about it? I'm afraid that in the last, well, until now, I guess that until now, and I mean until the last maybe months, I also find my frequentation with the United States, I increasingly realized that AI has been much more about marketing than something else, okay? So I would rather prefer until now to talk about deep machine learning than AI, but something different arises in the last months, it's true. We extensively talked about generative AI, but actually maybe we are at the forefront of a dawn of general AI. If someone followed the issue connected to Sam Altman, Q-Star project, etc., I think that the bottom line is that now this technology is really transforming in something else. So regulation is part of the problem for European Union and United States policymakers. But another part of the problem, and this is what I would love to cast light on, is what is AI for in general terms? You mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, I think that AI for a policymaker should be one of the means to foster research and industry to leapfrog to the actual production and research system towards something new, something else that maybe could be able to tackle many of the challenges that we are facing from an industrial point of view, but also from a societal point of view. And I mean, climate change, and I won't say to mitigate climate change, but I would say to reverse the effects of climate change. I would say energy, since, of course, renewables and nuclear fusion are now one of the chances that we have to face in order to make our productive model, a production model, able to cope with the existence of humanity and humankind itself. I would say, of course, all the connections to life sciences, etc., etc. So my point is that when regulating AI, and I also agree about the fact that timing is crucial to this end, because technology and private market go faster, definitely faster than policymakers, okay? When trying to regulate these issues, as policymakers, we should really think about the trade-off. What is at stake? So we are facing in the G7 2017 presidency, we introduced the acronyms Next Production Revolution. I think also, I mean, in accordance with OECD. At that time, I guess it was a bet. Now I think that we are really on the, I mean, we are on the down of a potential application of this NPR, provided that we foster technology in the most appropriate way. So what I'm trying to say is that when I think to regulation of AI, I have to bear in mind that co-investments, for example, between EU and US, and this is why I'm coming back to the TTC, should be one of the most crucial aspects that a policymaker should face and should think on. So my point is, what should be the right model to foster co-investment on the two sides of the Atlantic, for example, and how this co-investment should be extended at least to a like-minded community of countries, because the magnitude of the way public and private should address the issues that are already open in developing the new generation of AI should be at the forefront and on the mind of the policymakers. So the issue now is how to make public and private policies, public policies and private investment coexist on a path that shouldn't be harmful for the mankind, okay? And this is what regulation should be about. I won't say, I can't, and I won't say what G7, the next G7 Italian presidency should do, but I would say what I could suggest. I would suggest that maybe this could be also for Italy the right moment to introduce production as a topic. You know that the Digital Economy Working Group didn't face this topic for long. I mean, after our presidency, it was somehow more about digital regulation, ethics, etc., than production itself. So I think that now it's the moment to cast the attention of the G7 membership on how the production, the real economy, should be boosted in order to affect positively the life of mankind. And in order to leapfrog and to move from the actual situation to more a new generation of production ecosystems, I guess that technologies such as AI, general AI, especially quantum, and I mean, all the other innovation that can enable such revolution could be at the very heart of the discussion of the membership. So in this respect, I think that in addition to all the activities that policymakers at EU and US level could do together with the private sector in order to release code of conducts, ethical recommendations, risk assessment, etc., the bottom line of my intervention is that it can't exist anymore a way to rule AI if we don't think about the purpose that AI should be addressed to in terms of general interest. And the purpose is to address many of the challenges that mankind is facing and boost, I mean, the capacity of our industrial sector, the like-minded industrial sector, to get results in a fraction of the time that humankind alone could do. Then, if I can echo, and I'm going to end my first round at least, let's get back to the Asimov rules. Okay, I think that this is even it could be, I mean, something I won't say uncomfortable, but very fun for a policymaker. The issue is that we are somehow, my opinion, my humble opinion, we're moving from childhood to teenaging of AI. And teenagers should know how to behave, and someone has to teach them, okay, how to behave. So let's get simple. Let's be cautious about this technology, but don't forget that innovation should always be considered as the most powerful source of prosperity for the humankind. Of course, there is a lot of background noise, and this is geopolitics. Because if we would have lived in a world where multilateral exercise and I mean, as Dr. Greco reminded us in the very beginning, and the overall consensus on how to deploy technologies for the benefit of everyone, if it would have been this world, well, we could have been a little bit more relaxed. Of course, it's not, but we can't, I think that we can't lose the target, okay? We should continue to be stick to the point and stick to the target if we want to regulate AI, but don't lose the opportunity to make it one of the trailblazers for the next 30, 40, or 50 years for the mankind as a whole.
So many thanks, Dr. Gumina. I think it's extremely important to emphasize also market trends and how they impact the regulatory efforts. Of course, it remains to be seen if those efforts will be able to have a positive effect and take into account the technology advances in due time also. That's a race, difficult to manage. And second, of course, this emphasis is important on the very purposes, how this new technology can be used for improving the well-being of citizens, but also possibly helping advance a global agenda, implement some international programs. That's also important. So that in regulating AI, we should also consider these general aspects. You also mentioned again the role of the G7. Let me stress that our institute will be co-chairing one of the official engagement groups of the G7 called Think 7, and we will be responsible in particular for the task force on digitalization and AI. So this will be for us also further opportunity to help advance the dialogue and debate also in this country, particularly in this country, by involving possibly Italian decision-making makers as much as possible in this dialogue. So thanks again, Dr. Gumina, and then the floor goes to Dora Meredith, Director of ADI. Please, Dora, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I hope you can hear me okay. I'm very sorry not to be there in person. I'm afraid I'm traveling today, but thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you to IAI for organising such a fascinating discussion, and to Andrea for that fantastic presentation, which I really enjoyed. And I completely echo what was just said, that I thought it was a fantastic overview of some of the key issues and debates. So as was just said, my name's Dora Meredith, and I'm the director of ODI Europe, which is another think tank in Brussels working on global affairs. Previously to that, I worked at the Institute for the Future of Work, looking at the implications of technology in the workspace, which is, of course, a very big area. I think for me, the main point I wanted to make to the discussion today is just stressing the point of the importance of getting the global nature of governance right. For me, this is so important, both because the risks of AI are, of course, global in nature. So we need to avoid what's been termed an AI arms race or AI nationalism. But also, as has already been said, the opportunities are, of course, global. And, we really need to make sure that we share the prosperity of technological development. As I think the economist Darren Acemoglu has highlighted very effectively in his recent book, technological development doesn't benefit the masses automatically. Policy decisions are important in shaping shared prosperity around technology. And that's why we need to make sure that we get governance of AI right, and that we think about who is benefiting from these technologies. So that brings us to the question, how do we create effective regulation globally, and what could the role of the TTC be within this? I think for me, when I was sort of reflecting on that, the question about regulation, and who's designing that regulation, we really need to think about, who's gaining the competitive edge in being involved in shaping it. I know there's been a lot of discussion about the scientific input into that regulation. You might have seen Mustafa Suleyman writing about the need for an international panel on AI safety, for example, similar to the panel that there is on climate change. And again, I think we should be thinking about the global nature of bodies like that if they are set up. We can't just have big tech, being part of that scientific input. It needs to be much broader, and really thinking about the global implications of the developments. The other side to regulation, of course, is enforcement, and I think that would be something I'd like to sort of talk a little bit about in the discussion. How do we actually enable enforcement of this regulation, and what are the roles of the EU, the US, but also global actors? In the writing that I've done to date on this, I've also been reflecting on how this could be an opportunity to really strengthen the international system. So there is a lot of, wider debate about the issues with multilateralism currently. And I see the AI area as a real opportunity for us to be saying, wait a minute, this is an area we can do things differently. We can think, really purposefully about how we set up this global governance, and the balances of power within that, which then sort of comes back to the original question, well, how do you leverage the TTC within that kind of ecosystem? And I think for me, Andrea's point about the deeper results is really important, and thinking about, how can you leverage the TTC to shape that international governance, and which, might be thinking about global prosperity and share a shared global agenda. And I think that's one of the things that I'd really like to sort of discuss. What would that mean in practice? How could that look? So yeah, I think I'll leave it there and pass back to the questions. Just to mention, ODI would be very keen to continue to discuss in this area, and we're also working quite a lot with the G20 on some of these discussions. So, thank you.
Many thanks for, I would say, widening even further our horizon, and especially for emphasizing that this issue of AI regulation is indeed part and parcel of a wider problem of relaunching multilateralism and multilateral instruments. The problem, of course, we have, and based on Andrea's presentation, I would say the obstacles are significant, is how, at what extent the transatlantic partners may give an impulse, and a fruitful one, to global regulation in the face of so many the different initiatives. Then they, of course, do not show that there is a real convergence of efforts. So many issues are now on the table, and I would open up. So please raise your hands. You should also be able to intervene orally, directly. So I invite all the participants to use the raise alza la mano instrument, so that we can, yeah.
There is already one question that came in for Andrea Gumina. And how do you think Italy is fostering the AI production and in general innovation? So let's how?
Let me say that one of the issues that we are facing also at Italian level, one of the answers, and then it could be a general answer to the question posed about how TTC can help us in driving our forces together. This objective is to foster co-investments. Okay, one of the most interesting experience that I've made during the last 12 months is that I found out how regional innovative ecosystems from an industrial point of view are willing at Italian level to match activities with, for example, US existing ecosystem. Okay, so a state, let me say, regional governor with a state governor activity. And this is something that, for example, we are trying to pursue both at, let me say, policy level and industrial level. So one of the possible answer to a question such like this is to enhance, given also the availability of a lot of talents and competence in Italy, the opportunity of our industries to cooperate with US industries in this, specifically in this field. Okay, and in addition to that, I would say that also according to me, one of the critical and most interesting feature that we can put on the table maybe is connected to our way of looking things from an ethical perspective. So I would say that definitely we can contribute to the development of the next model of AI, both through our talents, and so in doing so fostering also with appropriate industrial policies the opportunity to take advantage of the mutual competitive advantages, sorry for the wording, between Italy and US, and in a wider sense between EU and US, and also contributing to this debate by bringing in our natural attitude, let me say, to make things more ethically. Okay, so that's the point.
All right, thank you very much, Andrea. I want to add to what you were saying, something, not add to your answer, but just add a comment. What we are seeing in the US that is quite interesting for us, although for us, I would say Europeans, and certainly for us Italians as well, is the direction that industrial policy has taken over the past years. A direction that looks at regional level, a lot more. And just a few weeks ago, the US announced big funding of 31 regional innovation engines in the US. They're not giving money to California. They're giving money to Montana and North Dakota. They're giving money and support to areas that would not naturally generate that level of competitiveness, right? Or that level of industrial development, based on an analysis, which is an analysis we do. We are starting to do this at CEPS in Brussels as well, on the basis of economic complexity and economic geography, on the related so-called technological specialization at the regional level, and then matching the availability of skills or the potential creation of skills with the technological specialization. This is what has been done there, and even interesting there at the regional innovation policy. But also, if you look at what is happening in the Inflation Reduction Act and in the CHIPS Act, all these interventions, including the tax credits and the subsidies that are being offered to say American, Mexican, and Canadian players willing to invest in clean tech, are not subject only to the conditionality of producing, assembling in the US and producing with clean energy or adopting clean energy solutions. Most of these investments and subsidies are given with a conditionality that is related to the creation of so-called good jobs. And this term, good jobs, which mostly comes from the elaboration of a famous Harvard economist, Danny Roderick, are the jobs, they are not the data cleaners' jobs. They are not the jobs that, are not nurturing human capital or being very precarious, as very often happens in the age of AI. For example, ChatGPT was trained by Kenyan workers for $1 a day. Okay, so this is not the types of jobs that we're talking about. So the good jobs, which have become increasingly interesting also for the EU policy, which has not incorporated good jobs in industrial policy yet, is the fact that the good jobs are the ones that are they're complementary to machines. They empower human beings, and they are stable from an economic perspective and give prospects of growth, career development, and intellectual flourishing. So those ones that are typically the middle-class jobs, the US is convinced that there has been a sort of a U-shaped development in the labor market where the middle-class jobs have been completely lost. In the EU, we see a sort of a J-shaped, meaning that even the less skilled jobs and the middle skilled are being emptied out. And so there's a need to bring the whole workforce towards a higher level of skills. But all this has become quite important in the definition of the future priorities of industrial policy at the EU level. I had this conversation with Enrico Letta a few days ago in the context of the report on the single market that is writing for the council, will be presented in March 21 next year. It is going to be an interesting development because while complaining on the one hand, the EU is also learning from the Inflation Reduction Act, which is, in my opinion, a very interesting piece of industrial policy. The only problem for us is that it has stolen from us what the primacy that we wanted to achieve, which is making the EU the best place in the world for green investment. And you see that it's going to be much more complicated to achieve this goal for us. So what can the EU do to catch up with the US in that respect? Many things. I'm going to get to this in a second because I received from Antonio Meloni a dedicated question on this. I wanted to go a little bit into a couple of things that were said by Andrea and Dora first. First of all, Andrea, I am much less into artificial general intelligence. I do believe that at the moment it is a big hype. Having seen a bit of these developments behind the curtains, not all of them, of course, I haven't seen Q-Star, but I think it is something that is very cleverly used by the technology sector to divert the attention of policymakers from national regulation, from fundamental rights towards safety. The more you see the tech giants or the companies that are satellites to them, the likes of DeepMind or Anthropic or OpenAI, proposing solutions for global AI governance, the more they become ambitious, the more they become, let's create, for the thing that they say it's very urgent, they propose the creation of 4 new international agencies. In my opinion, it's a bit, the reality is a bit different than this. There's an interesting interview and podcast, I believe. I believe it's either The Guardian or Foreign Affairs, with one of the, I think, the most reasonable experts in AI around the world, that in my opinion is Fei-Fei Li in Stanford, the creator of the ImageNet, right? And she's pretty much aligned with this view, right? Saying one of the pieces for SEPs that I mentioned in my presentation towards the end actually goes into this. The effect of this enormous hype and shifting the attention towards safety, to the extent that we heard Ursula von der Leyen in the State of the Union speech saying very little about regional cohesion in Europe, but dedicating a passage to the risk of extinction of the human race, which in my opinion is a bit too much. This big hype has had 2 effects. First of all, venture capital has moved away from the meaningful uses of AI for the Sustainable Development Goals, for pandemic preparedness, for health, for climate, and so on, towards artificial general intelligence. There's an enormous amount that goes there now. 61% of venture capital in the world goes to the US on AI, and of this, and the venture capital that goes to these meaningful uses of AI, if you wish, AI for good, is decreasing year on year, 22 and 23. And the part on artificial general intelligence is booming. And so one wonders whether this is the right way to use investment money at the moment. And the second thing, it has weakened national legislation in the name of what is at the moment a relatively fluffy developments in global governance or in international governance. So as an observer and an academic, I tell myself, is that random? Is that unintentional? Or is this something that is intentional on the side of those powerful companies that want to divert the attention? I had a quick exchange with Sam Altman when he came to Brussels to go visit Ursula von der Leyen. He had, first of all, no clue about what the EU wanted to do, but he only had one idea, that it was entirely antithetical to what he had just said to the US Senate, that he didn't want regulation in the EU. And so I'm a bit skeptical that this is happening. What we hear behind the curtains, and where I would concur with Andrea, so maybe not in another 20 years, but maybe in 2 months, hopefully next time we see each other, or even less, we will see a development which is the marriage of powerful AI models with quantum computing that would be perhaps a game changer. In my opinion, not in the direction of artificial general intelligence, but in the direction of something that happens very fast, uses cryptography in a way that, for the cybersecurity experts in the field, it's very hard to monitor, and disrupting a lot of what is happening at the global level and the multilateral order to some extent. On the other hand, very quickly to Dora, enforcement, it's going to be the litmus test, as it was for GDPR, right? Enforcement and compliance was the litmus test for GDPR, and we failed it, right? So with what we know about the levels of compliance with GDPR today, and this comes of age next year when the review of GDPR will be due, and we will see the reports and the evaluations, and they, in my opinion, too often evoke the Brussels effect on GDPR. Depends very much on whether this measure, however inspiring and enlightening, will actually prove to have been effective over time. And I think we will have bad surprises there. Also, we see this, and we look at the wild violations of privacy that occurs on a daily basis on the internet, right? So that said, enforcement in the case of the AI Act will depend on the availability of a strong institution, should be the AI office, that oversees AI developments. updates the state-of-the-art knowledge of AI on a daily basis, and by monitoring the market is also able to inspect AI systems. Now, the EU has done a couple of interesting things in that respect. One is the creation of a Center for Algorithmic Transparency, hosted by the JRC site, the Joint Research Center site in Sevilla. That is interesting, but just a starting point. Although at the moment, rather than an independent authority, the AI office seems to be on its way to becoming an internal service to the European Commission. I'm not sure this would be a great move, but let's see how, I mean, at least the EU is trying to pave the way for this. The TTC can be instrumental in making enforcement work. That would be important because the EU cannot go it alone on monitoring and enforcement. But of course, you need to have at least common standards, not necessarily the same regulation, but at least the same direction and the same scope in regulation if you want to really join forces in monitoring and enforcement.
I think you have now a daunting challenge because we have as many as 6 questions or so.
I will finish on this.
Yeah, okay. Just in 10 minutes, but
I will
please.
finish on this and then look through the. So I'll finish on this and go through the questions. Looking at Dora, how can we consolidate and improve the multilateral order by starting with AI or by using AI? Okay. I do believe that, and we saw that this in the recent meeting between Biden and Xi. AI is one of the areas where there might be common interest in reaching agreement. The regulatory frameworks are not very different. Of course, the scope and the direction is quite different. But I think there can be at least an area for avoiding military uses of AI that can be extremely disruptive. I don't think we will get to a major agreement on lethal autonomous weapons anytime soon, but at least there could be a sort of an agreement on responsible uses in war zones. There might be convergence in terms of standards and terminology, also with China, but this happens, it's more likely to happen if the EU and the US get their act together first in the TTC. And so this is potentially one avenue. When it comes to developing countries or less developed countries, the Trade and Technology Council has a working group 4, that has started to launch joint investments of the EU and the US in now 4 selected countries around the world. In my opinion, a lot needs to be done to make sure that less developed countries partake in the benefits of AI. Otherwise, they will be excluded from value chains, from having access to these benefits. The world's inequality will be exacerbated. But for this, we need data flows, data governance, infrastructure, skills. Even before we think about potentially autochthonous AI developments. So these are sort of sparse considerations. What can the EU do to catch up on AI competition with the US? First question. In my opinion, the EU should locate the, first of all, should be serious on one of the 2 ecosystems that it promised to build and develop in 2020 in the white paper on AI. One is the ecosystem of trust, and this is the legislation. The other is the ecosystem of excellence, but we don't see much happening there. If you look, and there's another paper I recently published with SAPS, or as part of an expert group I belong to for DG Research and Innovation in the European Commission, we mapped what is going on in Europe and who's developing AI in Europe. We find 4 main hubs for AI development in Europe. I'm not saying EU, but I say Europe, because one is the Île-de-France, the area of Paris. The other one is the area of Eindhoven in the Netherlands. The third is the area of Munich. And the fourth, and perhaps the biggest, is London. If you look at how, and there's a paper for those that are interested, I'm happy to share that. If you look at the extent to which these hubs communicate and cooperate with each other, it's almost 0. So the Île-de-France cooperates with Stanford much more than with Munich. And so the EU should really try to map the specialization on AI, link it to data spaces and industrial policy, and have these hubs work together as much as possible. Maybe we'll have Torino one day, or any other area of Italy. At the moment, we don't see much happening there. I think that is essential. And also mapping, as Andrea was saying, our complementarities with the US and being able to leverage our respective advantages. We have a flourishing academia on AI. We are very bad, of course, as always, in translating our academic accomplishments into innovation and innovation that diffuses on the market. Is there a venue agreed already for the next CTC ministerial? No. What I can say, the next CTC ministerial, as you might sense, is not going to happen before the end of this year, but will happen most likely on the 30th and 31st of January next year in the US. We don't know yet where in the US. This normally is disclosed very late in the process. We actually don't know how long will the ministerial be, but it certainly will be organized back to back with one event that was supposed to take place in December and then was postponed, which is the so-called TIST, is the Transatlantic Initiative on Sustainable Trade. And there, the TIST is now being postponed to 30th and 31st. We know that the ministerial will be back to back with it. Whether it will last 2 hours or 2 days or a half day, we don't know yet. So things are being reassessed. What happens after that is also more complicated. There will be elections in the US, there will be elections in the EU. I hardly imagine what can, a ministerial in the first half of 2024. But that's the current plan, that there will be also TTC 6 in Belgium by the month of June, most likely. But again, this is all tentative as we speak. TTC is coordinating with the Hiroshima process and the OECD work. Well, first of all, I guess, I don't know if Federico Orsi meant the OSCE or the OECD, because the TTC is not really coordinating with the OSCE, Security and Cooperation in Europe, but it is cooperating and coordinating with the OECD and the G7, meaning the code of conduct that was presented by Vestager to Gina Raimondo and the Biden administration in a sort of embryonic form, then became the first draft of the code of conduct that was recently presented by the G7 in the context of the Hiroshima process. The Hiroshima process at G7 extensively quotes the work that the OECD is doing in building interoperability between risk frameworks between different countries, not just US and EU, but also Japan. They are adding Canada, then the frameworks of the Council of Europe, the IEEE, and even the OECD frameworks for due diligence for responsible business conduct. So I'm happy to share all these materials. All my contact information is public, so you just have to use some AI, for example, Google me or whatever. You'll find it, so you just send me an email, or if you want, the Instituto can share my contact information. How to reconcile the aims enshrined in the Commission proposal of regulation, which seems to be in an embryonic stage with the geopolitical context, the pervasive internet nature of AI programs, the higher speed of tech developments compared to policymakers' initiatives and the global governance. To me, the most important thing is actually the AI Act is a very good starting point. It has shaped also the self-regulatory initiatives of many other countries. But to me, what I find is what in an acronym that is quite often used, mostly in the Anglo-Saxon world. When in Rome, here we had downtown Rome, I would use probably the term horror vacui. At the global level, I would say FOMO, fear of missing out, meaning the idea that policymakers want to continue filling in the AI Act with all latest developments and continue rewriting things, just like Alessandro Manzoni rewrote the Promessi Sposi for 40 years, right? We don't have 40 years, even if the final result was decent, I would say, in the case of Manzoni. We don't have 40 years to wait to have a spectacular AI Act. We have to get it done, and there will be opportunities to regulate further. So it is not in an embryonic stage. I think it was 99% ready and agreed between the three co-legislators already a year ago. I do think that the right solution is to introduce a code of conduct for foundation models and couple that, as I say in that editorial that I showed, with a sunrise clause, meaning the market will be monitored. If market concentration or lack of transparency or copyright infringement become widespread over the coming months, there will be regulation. by the AI office, if it's an implementing measure or a new piece of regulation at the EU or global level. And so that, in my opinion, is the only way to get this thing done, turn the page, work on its implementation going forward. So I already perhaps answered the question by Daniele Regoli. I do believe for now in a code of conduct with obligations that should be vetted and certified by the European Commission. One thing that could happen over time, and I think would be the next step, is to introduce, but I don't think this should be done in the current trilogue, to introduce in the AI Act the same provision that we have in the Digital Services Act, so that AI systems could be opened up to vetted researchers that could look inside the algorithms and perform systemic risk assessments. But to do this at the end of a complicated legislative procedure where none of the impact assessments or the stakeholder consultations have even contemplated such an option, just as a last-minute introduction, I think is bordering on the inconstitutional at the EU level in terms of the current legislative procedure. So I would not advise, despite the fact that both the European Commission and the rapporteurs of the Parliament, whom I saw yesterday in the European Parliament, would like to have that. I think that that is very much of a stretch in the evidence-based nature of our better regulation system and our legislative procedure at EU level. How confident am I that the current approach to regulate AI will make the next generation of AI systems models safer? They have to be safe and respect fundamental rights. And I think without adequate involvement of civil society and a well-educated civil society that can look into algorithms, this is never going to happen. The other thing that should happen over time is that government need to become smarter, what we call GovTech, and the use of AI to monitor AI in the next 4 or 5 years, I think will be on page number 1 of our handbooks of innovative agile regulatory tools. And then Antonio reminded me that the sound went off. Thanks for that, but I saw it only now, so perhaps. But thank you to be so prompt. And finally, Cristiano, Europe is fragmented. Italy, France, and Germany for once are aligned, so you have to be happy about this. What do I think about it? There are many other member states that actually share the vision of France, Italy, and Germany with some tiny differences. During the discussions on the AI Act, 14 member states at some point had taken action to invoke less regulation. I am not a less is more person. I'm actually very much fond of a good regulation. In this specific case, I think we're overdoing it, again, for the reasons that I was mentioning before. I think member states are pretty much aligned on the fact that there should be a rather softer intervention on foundation models and general purpose AI systems. But the reason is not because one doesn't want to regulate them now, but first of all, we don't know much about them. And second, the AI Act is built around the idea that you don't regulate the technology, but you regulate the applications of the technology. This is a major deviation from that principle. If it becomes, apparent that we actually have to regulate upstream, let's say, the foundation models, but this requires studies, discussion, consultations, then we would probably go into a new wave of regulation in the new commission. Otherwise, the risk is that for the urge to hit perfection, we end up in a traditional situation in which perfect is the enemy of the good. We don't get the AI Act done within this European Commission. We get, alas, hopefully not, but a very fragmented, much more nationalistic, much different, a very different European Parliament in the next mandate. And this thing never sees the light. It would be a major reputational backlash for the EU. And it would be bad for the rest of the world, because for good or bad, what we have done from the high-level expert group on AI to all the discussions, the AI Alliance, thousands of people that have helped us shape the regulation until now, even if it only has side collateral effects on international governance of AI before it actually is finalized into a law. But I mean, all this process has been extremely useful. If it doesn't result in a piece of legislation in the very end, it will be remembered as one of the worst pages of the EU technology policy, at least, and since the beginning of the European community, I would say.
So many thanks, Andrea. We have gone a little bit beyond the time limit we had, but this shows the great interest surrounding this topic. There were indeed many interesting, stimulating questions. They need to be responded. And I would also say that our speakers have really shed much light on many aspects, including in the last part of our discussion, the government strategy, the strategy to be adopted, the real challenge. So need to be flexible. That's the main message I would get. And I can testify, having worked for some time with Andrea, that he has always adopted a far-looking approach. I remember 20 or even more, 15 years ago, we started working on the Internet of Things. So it was a real development for our institute, a very important contribution that Andrea gave to our work. So again, many thanks, all of you, for joining us, and a virtual applause to our speakers. So we will certainly keep you informed on the developments of research in this field, and particularly what we will do or we will plan for the G7 next year.